right. Boys and girls, page 243. And we shall sing together our service of light and Psalm 141. And then we're going to talk about Samson tonight. So let's rise. Jesus Christ is the light of the world, the light no darkness can overcome. Stay with us, Lord, for it is evening, and the day is almost over. Let your light scatter the darkness and illumine your church. Joyous light of glory of the immortal Father, heavenly, holy, blessed Jesus Christ. We have come to the setting of the sun, and we look to the evening light. We sing to God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You are worthy of being praised with pure voices forever. O Son of God, O Giver of life, the universe proclaims your glory. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who led your people Israel by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Enlighten our darkness by the light of your Christ. May his word be a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. For you are merciful, and you love your whole creation. And we, your creatures, glorify you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Go ahead, be seated. Psalm 141, let my prayer rise before you as incense. Let my prayer rise before you as incense, the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. O Lord, I call to you, come to me quickly. Hear my voice when I cry to you. Let my prayer rise before you as incense, the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. Set a watch before my mouth, O Lord, and guard the door of my lips. Let not my heart incline to any evil thing. Let me not be occupied in wickedness with evildoers. But my eyes are turned to you, O God. In you I take refuge. Strip me not of my life. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. Let my prayer rise before you as incense, the lifting up of my hands We pray. Let the incense of our repentant prayer ascend before you, O Lord, and let your loving kindness descend on us, that with purified minds we may sing your praises with the church on earth and the whole heavenly host, and may glorify you forever. Amen. All right. Samson. You know, one of the challenges that we sometimes face in the church is that for many people, even who are very faithful in church, their knowledge of much of the Old Testament is what they got in Sunday school or whatever happens to come up in one of the readings on Sunday morning. The problem with that is that what you get in Sunday school is a very condensed version of what's actually there, both in terms of cutting out a lot of stuff that is actually in the text, but also tend not to set it very well in its larger context, because you just don't have much. I mean, the kids don't know that much, and it would be difficult to do. You have the same problem with readings on Sunday morning, is that they can only be so long. You can't have a 3-chapter reading, and then you can't, if you spend all of your time talking about all of Judges so that you can fit this into the context, you know, you don't have any time. You just can't do it. So stuff like what we're doing now is really, really helpful. And I'm sure that you're seeing what a difference it makes to be able to examine texts that, yeah, you kind of knew the story of Samson and Delilah, but you look at it new when you look at it as an adult with fresh eyes and start seeing, I never knew that was there. I didn't realize it put it that way. So let's talk about this. I'm going to begin tonight with a general introduction to Samson. Maybe we finish chapter 13. Which will also be kind of an introduction, because chapter 13 is about before Samson is born. But this will tell us more introductory material. And then next week we'll probably do chapter 14 and 15 and 16, the story of how Samson did what he did. Well, we'll see how far we get this evening. But right now, let's look. This is the number one thing that jumps out at us when we think of Samson, right? Physical strength, moral weakness. Do you see that just as clear as bell? Samson is just not, he's not a model for us to follow after. Physical strength and moral weakness, okay? So we're going to come back to these things in a little bit. Yeah, did you have something to?
I just wanted to see the parallel between Samson being born of an older woman, and you got Sarah and Abraham,
yep,
and you've got John the Baptist, Anna. You got all these. How does that play into what God is wanting to tell us?
Well, okay, on that narrow score, the fact that God keeps choosing women who can't have children to have children, I mean, that is reminding us once again that even women who can have children do not have children except by the blessing of God. This just makes it very obvious. So when God intervenes in this way, now you know something special is about to happen. And the truth of the matter is that a woman who is perfectly able to have children and then has children, something very special has happened there too, but it happens so regularly it doesn't grab our attention. So something special is happening here with Samson. And I mean, without doubt, there is more fanfare with his coming than with any of the other judges. And yet, you don't get the sense that Samson was a greater judge. So, but we are going to come back to that, because Samson is more than just another judge, okay? Physical strength, moral weakness. Was Samson not too bright? Because he keeps getting duped the same way over and over again. I mean, you know, fool me once, shame on you. But fool me, what, 4 times? Shame on me. Is it that Samson is stupid? I mean, that's putting it too hard, but not too bright. Or is it that he's presumptuous? He comes to think that I can tell him. I mean, I can tell him if I want. I am strong enough. I really don't need to keep this a secret. Think about that as not as an alternative, because it's possible that he wasn't too bright and presumptuous. But I want you to think about presumptuousness that perhaps Samson was a little overly confident in the gifts that God had given him, so that he was playing fast and loose with these things and didn't really care because he just grew too accustomed to them. That is a kind of not being too bright, by the way. But think about that when you think about Samson. Think about this. Samson did everything that he did by himself. Nobody was with him. He's an army of one. Whether he's slaying 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass, or doing any of the other things, it was only him. He never raised an army. There was no army that ever followed him. Okay, just him. And that should lead us to think about this. What a strange judgeship this is. It says that Samson judged Israel for 20 years. Now, I explained to you that by judging meant he was a leader of the people. Well, we don't have a single instance of Samson leading anybody. I mean, what he did himself. And he got everybody riled. He got the Philistines riled, and then he got the people from Judah riled. It certainly managed that, but we don't see a single example of him leading anybody else. Okay? That's a strange judgeship if what we mean by judging is that you are leading the people. Very unusual. Can we agree Samson was a rather selfish individual? He sees what he wants. He says to his parents, I want that woman. They plead with him, but she's not an Israelite. That's the woman for me. Okay? That seems to be the way Samson was. He is a selfish individual. You and I probably wouldn't have liked them. He was selfish. He was willful. What he wanted, he wanted. And that's that. He was lustful. He was not only lustful, but he had a particular lust for Philistine women. He didn't seem to care for Israelite women. It was Philistine women that he wanted. And, I mean, we have a prostitute, and we have two different women that other than the prostitute, and who knows what else is going on. So this is interesting. I mean, he does not seem like a man who is in control of his own will here. Finally, and this should be obvious in reading the text, he's very vengeful. What you see most of the time is Samson striking out in anger to get vengeance because of some injury that was done to him. Okay? You see that a lot. This is not the Lord saying to Samson, now we are going to visit these wicked Philistines and you are to be my judge and leader, raise an army. No. It's Samson gets mad and goes and kills 30 of them. That's what happens. And then they get mad and they do something to Samson. And then Samson gets mad and does something back to them. And then they come back and they do something back to him. And back and forth we go. It almost looks like the Hatfields and the McCoys more than it does our more traditional judges. And remember, once again, Samson is doing this all on his own. Samson was a man of tremendous gifts from the Lord. I mean, not only is his birth announced, by the angel, but also, it says that the Holy Spirit began to work in him, and then a number of places in the text it talks about the Holy Spirit rushing upon him. And then his physical prowess is legendary. I mean, as much as Solomon was wise, Samson was strong. And so, tremendous gifts, but they were largely wasted. I mean, if we're honest with the text, yeah, he managed to slay these and those and cause trouble and make a name for himself, but in the end, he didn't have a very heroic end. And an awful lot of his gifts he used on himself. Okay? So, tremendous gifts, wasted gifts. And yet the Lord kept working with him, right? He didn't shove him aside, even to the very end. The last prayer, Lord, this one more time, give me strength. And the Lord, one more time, gives him the strength to bring down, the temple of Dagon. So God, you would think, would, for a variety of reasons that we'll see as we get more into the text, this man does not deserve the blessing of the Lord, but he keeps getting it anyway. So we have wasted gifts, not totally wasted, but I mean largely wasted, and a very patient God who continues to bless him. Where have we seen this before? I want you to think in how many ways Samson is sort of a type, a picture of Israel at this time. Okay. Israel with a special birth from the Lord. Israel holy to the Lord, like Samson, who was a Nazirite, holy to the Lord. Israel holy to the Lord. Samson was very strong, right? Or not? What made Samson strong? Well, God, right? God made Samson strong. Samson even admits, cut my hair, which, of course, the strength was not in his hair. The point is that the hair was part of the Nazirite vow. We'll talk about that. But it was him being holy to the Lord that gave him the strength. But Samson admits, if I end my holiness to the Lord, which is what cutting of the hair would mean, then I'm just like every other man, he says. And we see over and over again that before Samson does one of his mighty things, not in every instance, but in several instances, we are specifically told that the Spirit rushed upon Samson, and then he did these amazing things. And now think about how that compares with Israel. Israel did amazing and wonderful things too, with the help of the Lord. More than Israel ought to have been able to do, Israel was capable of doing it. Under Gideon, remember, 300 Israelites were able to defeat all. Of course, we say, well, that was the Lord. Well, it's the Lord here with Samson too. So in other words, Samson's just an ordinary man, except that the Lord keeps doing extraordinary things through him. And Israel is just an ordinary nation, except that she is holy to the Lord, and God keeps doing amazing things through her little Israel. And then think of this. Think of that line up there. Well, think of how much we see in the behavior of Israel in the wilderness that we could say the Israelites were pretty selfish and pretty willful and pretty lustful, especially when you understand lust in its spiritual understanding of idolatry. As Samson keeps going after these non-Israelite women, Israel keeps going after gods other than God. Think also about the idea of wasted gifts and a patient God. Israel has been blessed with many gifts, the presence of God and the Word of God and His guidance and leading, and yet they keep squandering it foolishly. Okay? So, when you see this Samson, we're not just here to learn about Samson. I mean, it's not just here so that we know that once upon a time, long time ago, there was this fellow, and these are the things that he did. But that Samson is a picture also of what God is having to deal with his own people. And it fits very well in Judges, because during the time of the Judges, I mean, the people of Israel really were wasting all the blessings and benefits and gifts and strength that God had given them. By the strength of God, Joshua conquered the promised land. Now look where we are. Okay? Notice also the grand pattern in Judges, who was, of the 4 chief judges that we looked at, Who is the best? Who is the one that we have almost nothing bad to say? That's Deborah. That's the first one. And then Gideon, not as good as Deborah, but better than Jephthah. And then, of course, by the time we get to Samson, I mean, Samson's kind of a mess. Any thoughts?
The Nazarite vow.
We're about to talk about it.
Okay.
We are about to talk about that.
I didn't read your notes, by the way. I did not read your notes.
Well, that's okay, even if you did. No, so that's a general introduction to Samson, so that we understand that there's more going on here than just historical tidbits about things that happened back then. That we are getting a picture of what it's like, how we might characterize Israel, and as God continued to be patient with Samson, God continues to be patient with Israel also. Okay. All right. When I say we were going to get to that, we're going to get to it shortly. Okay, we've already mentioned once, this is all in chapter 13. We'll just talk about this briefly, and we'll look at the text. We have a barren woman and a visit from an angel. What does this sound like when you get to it, by the way? Yeah, I mean, it sounds a lot like Luke, doesn't it? And here's the angel coming to Mary. But, of course, it doesn't work out that way quite at all. By the way, there are some who have tried to make Samson into a Christ figure. One of the reasons why they do that is because of this visit of the angel at the beginning, and then also the special blessing of the Lord and the Holy Spirit, and the way he suffers and dies. The problem with this analysis is Christ suffered and died not because of his own sins, but because of ours. Christ's death on the cross was only tragic if you don't understand what's really going on. Otherwise, you realize this is actually a great victory. With Samson, it's pitiful. Samson's demise is pitiful. You would not expect that somebody so gifted by God, whose life began with an angel coming to your mother saying, you would not expect that that would happen. But it did. Okay, so let's talk about a Nazirite vow. Nazirite vows are defined in Numbers chapter 6. And what it means, to be a Nazirite means to be, you're separated, okay? So one of the basic understandings and ideas behind holiness is to be separate from things that are not holy. So a Nazirite is separated from the general population. You should understand that typically a Nazirite vow is not a permanent one. This is a permanent one. So that Samson is to be a Nazirite from birth all the way to death. This is unusual. Samuel was a Nazirite from birth until death.
Jesus?
Probably not Jesus, but John, yes. John specifically doesn't say Nazirite vow, but it starts talking in the same language as a Nazirite vow. So, but typically a Nazirite vow would be something that you would take and you would basically separate yourself for some holy task. And then when you were done, your hair would grow. You're not allowed to cut your hair when you're not Nazirite. And when you were done fulfilling your vow, whatever it is that you were to do for a week or a month or a year or whatever it is, then there would be certain sacrifices that would be offered in the temple for you, and then you would cut your hair at that time. And this meant that you are released from your Nazirite vow. You have completed it, and then you can go on with your life again. St. Paul undertook a Nazirite vow, and we read about that in Acts. I'm trying to remember which chapter it was, but he gets back to the temple and offers up the proper sacrifices and has his hair cut and all of that when he was done with his Nazirite vow. And he had done that for some purpose or another relating to, because he was ministering to among the Jews, and so he undertook this. But anyway, it shows its temporary nature. So it's unusual that we have somebody from birth. But then if you are being born of an older person who shouldn't be giving birth at all by the special blessing of the Lord, then It might be that the Lord is going to want you to be separated for him for your entire life. So we have similarities there with Hannah, who gave birth to Samuel, and with Elizabeth, who gave birth to John, and here with, what's her name? I should know it. No. Samson's mother. So anyway, Nazarite vow also, you couldn't cut your hair, you couldn't drink alcohol, you couldn't have any kind of grapes. Presumably, in the theory that there might be some fermentation that might happen. I mean, you just couldn't eat grapes of any kind at any time. Obviously, no strong drinks. You had to stay away from that. Dead bodies were particularly something that a Nazarite had to stay away from. Number 6 even makes it clear that even if it's your own mother or father who dies, you may not touch or be near that dead body. And then there's a scenario in Numbers chapter 6 that it says, and if you are under a Nazarite vow and somebody next to you drops over dead, this is how it goes, and they drop over dead right next to you, then you become unclean. And what happens is your Nazarite vow has now been broken. And so then it talks about what you have to do and for the next 7 days, and then you got to cut your hair and so on. And then you start your Nazarite vow over again, and whatever you've done up to that time would have been void, so because it's broken. So you start over again. So this is a big deal, not touching dead bodies, okay? And that becomes important
Well, when someone had a Nazarite vow or didn't you usually do that yourself? The person themselves chose
Yes.
to take a Nazarite vow.
Yes.
In this instance, the angel said ahead
Right.
of time, this child will be.
That's right. Same thing with John the
That's a little
Baptist, and the same time as Samuel. Remember, Samuel was devoted to the tabernacle service from before he was born. So yes, and typically it would be something that you would undertake for some task, and then you would just essentially be. I mean, imagine if you could become a monk or a nun for 6 months or 2 years or something like that, and where basically you're just taken out of circulation, you belong to God, you have some particular task, and then that would bring with it certain obligations that you would not have otherwise. And the Nazarite vow also makes it clear that when you have completed your vow and your hair is cut, okay, then it says you can go back to drinking again. You can go back to all the rest of this stuff. You're just like anybody else at that time. Okay. But the thing to be aware of is that a Nazarite means you're separated, you're holy to the Lord, and that's the key. That's the key thing that brings on all the various restrictions, because you are no longer sort of the ordinary populace. Okay, and Samson is one of those. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Philistines. Now we all know, we've heard about Philistines, and in our modern, colloquial, if you call somebody a Philistine, what you mean is they are unsophisticated, backwards, and so on. However, at this time, the Philistines were actually more sophisticated significantly than the Israelites, and technologically they were significantly more sophisticated. They developed facility with iron, and well before the Israelites did, and this gave them a huge military advantage that it took a long time for the Israelites to overcome. The Philistines also were different than the other nations round about Israel. Most of the nations round about Israel were other Semitic nations that had some kind of a connection to Abraham or to that cluster of people. And most of them practiced circumcision as well as, now it didn't have a religious significance like what Israel did, but most of them would have been circumcised. But the Philistines did not come from this area. They probably came from the area of the Aegean Sea or around Greece or somewhere like that. And they migrated down here. Right? So they don't come from this area. And so they were really recognized as more foreign than the other nations round about. And so they were routinely referred to by the Israelites as the uncircumcised, and that was not a compliment. And that was somewhat like what we mean when we say you're a Philistine. You're not one of God's people, and you're kind of backwards, and you're an uncircumcised person. We might say unwashed. Okay, we say unwashed. That's kind of what we're getting at. So the Philistines were technologically actually more advanced than the Israelites, but in the Israelites' view, they were also more barbaric. And we'll get pictures here as we're reading through that they could, in fact, be quite nasty and quite barbaric, and they were known for that. The Philistines lived in the area which, even today, you hear about the Gaza Strip. That was the area in which they lived. And there are 5 cities, I've listed them there. If you memorize those cities, I'm not saying that you ought to, but if you did, you'll find that you run across them, okay? Because they just crop up every now and then. And when you get to one of those cities, Gaza, obviously, Gath, there's a line, where is it? It's after Jonathan and Saul get killed, and a line from David that he's singing at this point, kind of a song. And he says, "Tell it not in Gath." This is also a sort of an English idiom. You may have heard that. Tell it not in Gath. It means don't let our enemies hear this, okay? Don't let the people in Gath hear what happened up here. And Akron, Ashdod, Ashkelon, those are 5 cities, the 5 cities of the Philistines. The Philistines are going to be around for a while. Samson, according to our text, began to save Israel from the Philistines. It said began to save. But the Philistines were still very much a problem all throughout Samson's life. And what Samson really did, I mean, when you look at it, you see these were a series of pinpricks and irritations. And there was no war advance. They didn't drive the Philistines out, nothing like that. There was a series of insults back and forth and ugly things that were done back and forth. And you might say Samson got the upper hand as between Samson and the Philistines. But the larger issue of the Philistines and Israel continued to be oppressed by the Philistines. That won't end. The battles with Saul and Jonathan were largely against the Philistines. And David also, while fighting for Saul, was largely against the Philistines. That was a major enemy at that time. And it was at that time when the Philistines really finally got subdued. It's under Jonathan, Saul, and David. Okay? So it's going to be a while yet before the Philistines are actually going to be vanquished. They're going to be around. And Samuel did not vanquish them. Okay. Any thoughts so far? We're going faster than I thought. I thought we might not even get through that first slide, but here we are. That's because you're all being so quiet. Okay, then let's take a look at, let's read some in chapter 13, just see what pops up here. Chapter 13, verse 1. Well now, we know that we're getting into another judge. How do we know? And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. So there you go. The cycle starts again, and this time a little worse. Yes, yeah. People want to. Now, there's very little in this. Actually, almost the entire business of Samson focuses on Samson and the Philistines, not the condition of the Israelites. We don't really learn much about that. There was a certain man of Zorah in the tribe of the Danites. The Danites were split into two. One was in the south and the west, so adjacent to where the Philistines were, and then the other was way, way up north. Okay, and that one actually survived longer. That group up there, but these are the southern group, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, "Behold, you are barren and have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Therefore be careful and drink no wine or strong drink, or eat nothing unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. By the way, a Nazarite and Nazareth have nothing to do with one another. Okay, so the fact that Jesus of Nazareth is, sometimes people think that that means that he was a Nazarite, but it doesn't. Now, verse 6, then the woman came and told her husband, a man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of an angel of God, very awesome. I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. But he said to me, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. So then drink no wine or strong drink, or eat nothing unclean. For the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. So this is a very typical ancient Near Eastern storytelling. And it's not just ancient Near Eastern, it's in non-literary cultures. So most people at this time could not write and could not read. And so stories are told in a very repetitive fashion. The angel says to her, this is what's going to happen. Then she turns around and tells her husband and repeats exactly the same thing. And you think, well, but that's because when you're listening to a story, that kind of repetition is very, very helpful to remember the important parts of the story. So we got it again. Then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come again to us to teach us what we are to do with the child who will be born. It's interesting that he's really concerned about that. But he is. And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of the Lord came again to the woman as she sat in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her, so the woman ran quickly and told her husband, behold, the man came to me, who came to me the other day has appeared to me. And Manoah rose and went after his wife and came to the man and said to him, are you the man who spoke to this woman? He said, I am. And Manoah said, now, when your words come true, what is it to be the child's manner of life, and what is his mission? And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, of all that I said to this woman, let her be careful. She may not eat anything that comes from the vine, neither let her drink wine or strong drink, or eat any unclean thing. All that I've commanded her, let her observe. Notice that he doesn't add anything. He doesn't answer the question. I want to know what this child's mission is. And he just reminds her again, this is what I told her to do. And that's it. Okay? So the Lord doesn't typically tell us what really is going on. And so our job is to do what? Is to be faithful. So there are things that we know, and there are things that we don't know. On the things that we know, we are to be faithful. If you know that this is what the Lord wants you to do, then there you have it. Do that. If you happen to know that there are other things that the Lord is about, and he doesn't tell you what else he's doing with this, well, be faithful in what you know. So if you know that your job is to be faithful in prayer, and be faithful in the Word of God, and be faithful to the commandments of God, and be faithful to Jesus, okay. And if you say, well, what about my life? What is this going to matter? How am I going to make a difference? What are you going to do with me? Etc., 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 etc. And the answer is, look, you know what you should do. And do that. As for what your life really is going to mean, that's up to the Lord. Okay? If he wants you to know, he'll tell you. Otherwise, you just trust that he knows what he's doing. Your and my job is to be faithful in what we know. Okay? Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, this is verse 15, please, let us detain you and prepare a young goat for you. And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, if you detain me, I will not eat of your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, then offer it to the Lord. For Manoah did not know that this was the angel of the Lord. It's not clear, apparently, by preparing a meal and all of this, Manoah is going to ingratiate himself to this man and maybe wheedle out some more information from him, or get him under his debt or something like that. But he would have none of it. I'm not going to eat your food. I've dispensed with my mission. If you want to offer something, I don't want a gift from you. You may offer it to the Lord. And then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "What is your name, so that when your words come true, we may honor you?" And the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why do you ask me my name, seeing it is wonderful?" This is one of those just enigmatic little passages. Kind of like, remember when Jacob was wrestling with the angel, and he says, "Tell me your name." And he says, "Well, why do you want to know my name?" Okay. In part, it's like, all right, no, you should by now have figured this out. But the other thing to understand is that knowing somebody's name gives you a certain relationship to them, and certain prerogatives and rights with respect to them, or you might think so. And this angel of the Lord is keeping quite aloof. I have told you what the Lord is going to do, and you have your marching orders, okay? That's what you have to do, and we're not going any further than that. Verse 19, so Manoah took the young goat with the grain offering and offered it on a rock to the Lord and to the one who works wonders, and Manoah, to the one who works wonders, the Lord. And Manoah and his wife were watching, and when the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord went up in the flame, in the flame of the altar. Now Manoah and his wife were watching, and they fell on their faces to the ground, because at this point they realized. Prior to that, they were dealing with what looked like a human being, a wonderful human being, kind of an extraordinary human being. But at this point they realized that what they've really been dealing with is the Lord. Not that this is the Lord's personal presence, but this was the Lord's own emissary, or Lord's own angel. Then the angel of the Lord appeared no more to Manoah and to his wife. And then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. And they were afraid they were going to die. For we've seen God. Verse 24, and the woman bore a son and called his name Samson. And the young man grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him in Mahanath Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. All right, we haven't even gotten to Samson yet. Got a whole chapter just laying the foundation for what's going to happen next. That's interesting, because I would say Gideon did a lot more to actually help and judge, and much more what I would consider leading the people and vanquishing the Midianites. Certainly Deborah drove out and conquered the Canaanites. All of that seemed to be, much more concrete. Samson, the world was not a very different place after Samson than before. And yet look at all this fanfare. And one wonders whether this is part of what I'm talking about. A wasted gift. In other words, God had so blessed this man, but it had been dissipated. And how much do we see of the same thing in Israel? Think about how Samson dies. He's blind. Think about what Isaiah says later on. Who is blind but my servant? Okay? And think of Jesus later on talking about the Pharisees being blind. That's that same theme going forward. Samson began with great promise because of the Lord's blessing. But when we actually get into Samson's character and personality, he doesn't seem to be about the Lord at all. Yet the Lord deals with him and doesn't punish him, or at least doesn't punish him the way he deserves, doesn't withdraw his blessings from him entirely. He continues to work with this man, even though the man continues to sort of take God's gifts and use them on his own. All right, so that's that's chapter 13. Wait for somebody to spout up something really. Oh, here's something. This is from last week. I meant to mention this, but I forgot. Remember when we had, this was the deal with Jephthah and capturing the Ephraimites as they were crossing the river, and they would tell them, can you say this? Say Shibboleth. And if they said Shibboleth, then good. But if they said Sibboleth, then you're toast, okay? And that's because you have these two different dialects, and the one couldn't pronounce. It'd be like me trying to pronounce the trilled R in Spanish or something. We've never been able to do it. You know, it's just if you're not raised with that, there's certain sounds in other languages it's very difficult to do. The English word shibboleth. I mean, you've probably heard that, a shibboleth. A shibboleth is like a catchword or a thing that you are known by this word, or you can, or this word sort of sums up what you're all about. And it's an English expression, and it comes from that, shibboleth. It's your shibboleth, your little tagline or something like that. That sort of, you and yours attach yourselves to that word, and if that's not your word, then you're not part of us, something like that. All right, fine. Let's go to chapter 14. Now we start to get into Samson's ministry, if we can call it a ministry. Let's begin.
That's a ministry?
A ministry.
His
ministry. Yes. Okay, chapter 14, verse 1, Samson went to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now, so this is a little village, and this village is not in the land of the Philistines, but it's close. Okay, but it's among the Israelites, and remember that the Philistines are oppressing the Israelites, so this Philistine there, he likes this daughter of the Philistines. And then he came up and told his father and mother, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. Now, that was a more common way of doing things, just that you dispatch your parents. This is exactly what happened, for example, with Isaac and Rebekah and all of that. So that in those ancient days, things like that sometimes happen. But in verse 3 it says, but his father and his mother said to him, is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among our people that you must go and take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. And so that's part of that willful thing. The parents are saying, look, this isn't right. And what he says is, well, she's right for me. I mean, that's basically what's going on here. His father and his mother did not know it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. Now that's interesting. It was not God-pleasing that Samson marry a Philistine. The Israelites were to marry among themselves. They were not to go outside, although that did happen. Okay? Samson is doing something then that, on the surface, is not pleasing to the Lord. But then it says, this was from the Lord. Now, this doesn't mean that the Lord created a desire in Samson that was not a wholesome and good desire. And so we could say, if Samson does something he shouldn't do by marrying this Philistine, it's God's fault. It's Samson that's wanting to do this, but God is going to use this willingness of, and think about this also. It would be bad enough if Samson was just any ordinary Israelite wanting to marry a Philistine. Okay? But this is a Nazirite. He's supposed to be holy to the Lord. He's about to marry a Philistine. Now, this doesn't seem to occur to Samuel that it makes any difference at all. At any rate, the Lord is using Samuel's own issues. Samson. Yeah. Samuel was easier to work with. He was a lot easier to work with. He's using Samson's own issues and predilections, and he's going to use this, it says, in order basically to provoke some things with the Philistines. Verse 5. Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came toward him roaring. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces as one tears a young goat. Okay, so because he's very strong. Well, why was he very strong? Because the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. We are to understand that if the Spirit of the Lord had not rushed upon him, he better run and hope that he's faster than the lion. We're not to understand Samson as like Hercules or some mighty superhero of old who just was born with this super powerful strength. It is the Spirit of the Lord that rushes upon him. And this is all a part of the fact that God has specially set him apart for this. Now, he's going to use Samson in his power. He's going to work with Samson to make him powerful in order to create a lot of trouble and a lot of headaches for the Philistines. It's a ramp up to what will later be more serious warfare. Remember that David and Goliath is all with the Philistines too. So this is going to be going on for a while, and the Lord is starting to push back on the Philistines who are oppressing the Israelites. Okay, this is the Spirit of the Lord that does this. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Then he went down and walked and talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. So after talking to her, he still likes her.
That doesn't make sense because they were with him.
Well, yeah, evidently not. Okay, that's the thing. They went down, all of them went down, but they weren't evidently together. And, that's a good point. You look at that and you say, well, how could this have happened and then not see? But, yeah, that's how you know they weren't together, is because there's no way that he's going to fight this lion and them not see. Of course, it's also possible that they weren't together because they didn't really want to do this thing. Okay? They're not happy hooking up their son with a Philistine woman.
Why did they do it then?
Because he was a spoiled brat.
Actually, that's an interesting thought, and we can read between the lines. Does this seem like, the parents don't seem very strong here. Well, son, aren't there any lovely ladies among the Israelites? No, this is the one I want. Okay. That's the kind of sense you get for it, okay? Yeah, why didn't they just say, look, if you're going to do this, then you do it. I'm not helping you. Samson looks like a willful individual who is accustomed to getting what he wants. Now, if I may, and you don't have to pay me 2 bits for my psychological analysis, he's an only son of an older couple. Okay? Sometimes when that happens, you end up with very spoiled little children. And this is the only son of this elderly couple and announced by an angel. So, he may have just been a wee bit spoiled. He's certainly acting like it. Verse 8, after some days, he returned to take her. And he turned aside to see, so he meets her, and then he's going to go back and they're going to have a wedding. Okay, so we're going to have a wedding feast here in a little bit. And he turned aside to see a carcass of a lion, the lion that he'd killed, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion and honey. And he scraped it out with his hands and went on, eating as he went. You might think that that's gross. But the more important thing here is that this is a dead carcass. And a Nazirite is not supposed to be messing with a dead carcass. But Samson has done this without thought. And by without thought, I don't mean it. It didn't seem to matter to him that he's not supposed to do that. He does what he wants. And he came to his father and mother and gave some to them, and they ate, which wasn't very nice. Because it is, even if he wasn't a Nazarite, it's still unclean. In other words, you've made your parents ceremonially unclean by giving them stuff that had been on a dead body, and the dead body makes you unclean, but he doesn't tell them. So what we're to understand from this is Samson is not being very observant at all about the niceties of being a holy person in God's holy land and observing God's holiness. He just doesn't seem to care. And of course, he's not nice to his parents either. He doesn't bother to tell them. Verse 10. His father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, so the young men used to do. So here's an interesting thing, is that because you have a Philistine / Israelite mixed marriage, okay? And so what you're having here is the wedding is happening where the woman is. Normally it would happen where the man is, but these are Philistines, so they're going down to the Philistines. The Philistines are providing these 30 companions. It's evidently part of the Philistine custom here, and so the parents are going along with this. As soon as the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him, and as part of the wedding party. And Samson said to them, "Let me now put a riddle to you. If you can tell me what it is, within the 7 days of the feast," it's going to be a 7-day marriage feast, "and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes." It's a big, that's a lot. "But if you cannot tell me what it is, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes." What did he just do? What is this? In colloquial language, what is he doing?
Gambling?
Yeah, he's making a bet. I'll wager you, I can tell you a riddle, and you can't tell me the answer. And if I'm right, you're going to pay me 30 garments, and if you're right, if you could guess it, I'll pay you, okay? So as part of the wedding festivities, he decides he's going to make a pretty significant wager. And they said to him, "Put your riddle, that we may hear it." And he said to them, "Out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong came something sweet." Okay, so our lion carcass is coming back again. "And in 3 days they could not solve the riddle. On the 4th day they said to Samson's wife," this poor little bride here, "Entice your husband to tell us what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire." So we see that the Philistines are not nice. But they go on to say, "Have you invited us here to impoverish us?" Why are they going to be impoverished?
Because you're going to have to give them all that.
Yes, if we can't get this riddle, we got to come up with the wager. And this is a lot. Okay? So they're unhappy, and they go to the little girl from their little town, and they say, "You better find out what the answer to this riddle is." And they threaten her. And Samson's wife wept over. Now, of course, this is all very humorous here. And Samson's wife wept over him and said, "You only hate me. You do not love me. You have put a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is." And he said to her, "Behold, I have not told my father and my mother." See, that's the point of him not telling them. "And shall I tell you?" She wept before him 7 days that their feast lasted, and on the 7th day he told her, because she pressed him hard. Now here at this point, it must have just been that he just simply misjudged what was going on here, and this is where you kind of have to say, "You're not too bright, are you?" I mean, this is not a girl you've known for very long, and we're talking about a lot of money here. Then she told the riddle to her people, and the men of the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, which is when they had to guess by, "What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion?" Oh, Shazam, they guessed it. What do you know? And he said to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle."
That's tacky.
It's a little tacky. That's right. And that's why I put it up there. The nervous Philistines plow. They go to his wife and say, "You better find out what's going on here. We're going to burn your house down." And then Samson succumbs to his heifer. There is a sexual connotation there, but there's also the more general understanding of this is heifer would not be used to plow, and so it's kind of abusing an animal. So he's saying, you've abused this poor little girl and managed to sort of extract this information from her. Whichever way, whatever you did, okay, it wasn't nice and it wasn't fair. Where am I?
19.
Okay, there we go. 19? Yeah, there we are. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and struck down 30 men. Ashkelon is one of these 5 cities. So he goes down to one of the 5 cities of the Philistines, and personally and by hand he strikes down 30 men of the town and take their spoil and gave their garments to those who had told the riddle. So in other words, I'll give you your 30 garments. The way I'm going to get them is I'm going to go down to one of your towns. I'm going to kill 30 of your men, take their stuff, and give it to you. Okay? This is how Samson operates. But he didn't consider that he'd done anything wrong because they'd plowed with his heifer. And so, I'm just going to do to you what you did to me. In hot anger, he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. We're going to find out later next week. Not going to get to it this week. That the poor girl's father, when Samson runs off, he figures he ran off without his bride, and we haven't even finished the marriage feast, so apparently he didn't want to get married. And so rather than having the poor bride stood up on the altar, at the altar, so to speak, he gives her to, it may have been the guy we don't know, one of his companions gives him, so that she's not totally humiliated. And then they figure they'd never see Samson again. Well, they do see Samson again, and he's not very happy when he comes back and finds out somebody else now has his heifer. He's very unhappy. But that is for next week. But now this introduction here to Samson is not an exalted picture. The acts of great strength are both preceded by the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. We see what's in the Lord's doing is the Lord is going to use Samson to provoke stuff with the Philistines. And in a sense, it's a tit for a tat. The Philistines are oppressing the Israelites, and now God is going to use an Israelite to begin causing headaches for the Philistines. But it is all in anticipation of what's going to come later when the Israelites really will get the upper hand. Okay. Thoughts on any of this? Next week we'll take chapter 15 and chapter 16. Chapter 15 we'll get the follow-up, what happens after this. More tit for tat, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then in chapter 16 it'll be the famous Samson and Delilah, and we'll see what's going on there. And then the final epilogue there where he's takes down the temple on all those Philistines. And we'll ask ourselves what really was going on there, what was significant about that. Okay, so I think we're done with our live stream now, and we'll